Welcome to another episode of Make Mental Health Matter, where I, especially on Wednesdays, bring guests who have a story to share, whatever they have been through in this thing that we call life, and really looking into that place of hope. If you happen to be joining us for the very first time and you're watching on YouTube, make sure you mash down or click on that subscribe button. If you're watching on any of the streaming platforms like E360 TV, Apple Fire, Amazon, Roku, whatever it happens to be, make sure you add this into your wish list, your watch list, want to watch later list, so that you don't miss another episode. Because I promise you, and I say it all the time, but you don't want to miss an episode and the guests that I have, because they are simply incredible humans that really, especially again on Wednesdays, sharing their journey. And without further ado, I am going to bring up my guest for this evening. Portia, thank you so much for joining me.
Kelli, I extend my gratitude to you for inviting me on your show. Thank you so much. It's truly an honor to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you and I were chatting a little bit before you came up, but I want to give you an opportunity to just share a little bit about your story with the audience.
Absolutely. So, for those of you who don't know me, hello. I am Portia Booker. I am the host of the Grief Grand Tour TV show on E360, where we focus on embracing gratitude in order to evolve grief. After losing both of my parents in the last year, I found that there was a need to have conversations around grief because I found that there's a lot of people who are stuck in their guilt, stuck in resentment, stuck in feeling isolated, stuck in feeling all the emotions that are fighting for center stage, and also holding on to so much unforgiveness. And through my grief journey of losing my parents, it gave me the what I like to call the wake up call to really have conversations about formulating gratitude, finding gratitude in the fact that these people were amazing support systems throughout my life, and also building resilience, right? Because I think sometimes what we tend to not want to talk about, it slowly, I want to say, buries deep in our system. Like what they say is what the mind represses, the body expresses. And I saw that there were so many people in my life who were grieving, but they were just going about life like robots. And I didn't want to be like that. I wanted to change the narrative around grief. And then also being innovative in how we go about our grief journey. Because I think grief is a beautiful journey if we're open to seeing it. You know, they tend to say that grief is love without direction, but what if that love that we've dished into a person, a relationship, a job, or even into a new endeavor? What if that love energy is really about repositioning it or pivoting it back to ourselves? You know, grief in a nutshell is just one door closing and another one opening. So when that happens to us, if we're open to seeing what the benefits have been through the loss, then what truly is lost in our life. And then also finding empowerment, right? Because each and every one of us stories help us to get through. We've all heard different stories of people who have lost somebody and they've managed to come out on the other side, but they've learned to, in a sense, leverage their grief by embracing it like an uncomfortable hug. And then forgiveness, right? Like I talked about on my show, my father was very much absent throughout my life. And as he was transitioning, his absence taught me how to be present and show up in my own life. And Kelli, I'll touch on what we talked about before we jumped on air. Earlier today, I've received two phone calls. I'm gonna get through this without crying. If I do, it's okay. Two close people in my life have experienced transitions. One being a suicide, and the second one being a loved one who was very sick for a long time. And the fact that they both took the time to call me, I could feel their grief. And it really took me back to where I was with both of my parents transitioning. And one of the things that both of these people said to me was, I called you because I knew you understood. And hearing that, Kelli, really gives me a sense of peace and a sense of comfort knowing that my journey has inspired other people because I could feel their pain. And I know that there's a lot of stigma around suicide, especially for anybody, whether you're a sibling, a parent, there's a lot of stigma around that. And I want to help more people, especially in that arena, to help with their grief journey and not feel as though they are at fault for what happened. So I send my love to my two friends. I'm definitely here. I told them I'm here. You call me. I don't care what time of day it is. We'll cry together. We'll laugh together. We'll go through all the emotions together. But I wanted them to know that someone heard them, someone saw them because I've been there.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And I know when you and I connected originally, I was like, oh my gosh, I want you on my show. And you're like, oh my gosh, I want you on your show. And we just the synergy, I knew it would be amazing because like you, I run a grief and support loss group, and it's one of those topics that not everybody wants to talk about, or they maybe have some misconceptions or misinformation. And oftentimes in society, we hear the words like, aren't you over it yet? Or you should be over it. Or, like there's so much stigma around grief and loss, or we think that there's a book that's going to guide us step by step. And if we're not following that, then maybe we're doing it wrong. So there's a lot of emotions that come up around grief and loss. And then I love how you expressed it in such a clear and concise way, because it really truly is something that we should be talking more about. And if we can start really sharing these type of conversations, then we're helping to break down that stigma and also give that space for those to come to you when something happens. And I think that's just incredible that you have created that space for your friends to reach out and know that you would be there to support them.
Kelly, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. There's so much stigma around grief, just like with mental health. And I think that we live in a unique time where people are being more open about what's truly hurting them, right? There's a lot of what I call hidden grief when a friendship breakup happens, right? When I'm currently full transparency grieving my old self right now. And, there's a part of you that wants to hold on to that version of you because of the memories, right? The people who were around you, the fun times. But as me and you both know, elevation leads to isolation sometimes. And that's okay. And I think that in our life, we grieve at so many different parts of our life, right? Like how many of us, when we were growing up, we had cousins or siblings who we would play outside, play kickball with, right? None of us thought about the day that this would be the last kickball that we kick in the tree that's stuck, right? Or when we graduate from high school, right? How many of us don't think about after graduation day, we're not going to be sitting in the same study hall cracking jokes or flinging gumballs across the hall. It's we grieve those moments because I remember from high school to college, I grieved. I remember from college to my first big girl job, my TV career that ended up, I had to let go of that. And that, when I think about that experience, Kelly, of me letting go of my dream job after I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and almost ended my own life by jumping off of a bridge, that that experience paved the way for me to be able to handle the grief of losing both of my parents. And that was just 7 years ago with my first TV career. So I think that grief is ever evolving. And you said it, like we think that there's this algorithm that 2 plus 2 is always 4. Well, with grief, it looks more of like an algebraic expression such as y equals mx plus b. There's going to be variables that change, right? And I think that if we cultivate that thought pattern that grief is not linear and just allow ourselves to feel, allow ourselves to go through it, I think it will help us in the long run, and then seek support. right? Because I think we tend to isolate because we don't want to be a burden. I know I still sometimes wrestle with that a lot, where I feel like I'm a burden. So I don't always reach out to my friends or reach out to my close inner circle. But then I've learned to, we have a code word. We do my, me and my coaches and friends, we have a code word. If Portia text you this word or code, Portia's in trouble. Knock on wood, I haven't had to do that lately because I've been forcing myself to not isolate. I force myself to reach out when I'm struggling because, I think about that quote of, I'd rather listen to your cries late at night instead of hearing your eulogy.
Mhm.
So every time I think about that, I always take time to reach out. So I know I just went on a long monologue, but
No, that's okay. So there's several parts of what you just said that I want to touch on. The first one is, and it is something I say often in my grief and loss support group, is that grief looks very different for everybody. We all experience grief and loss differently, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the loss of a person. It could be the loss of a pet, it could be loss of a relationship, it could be the loss of an identity that you thought was once going to be and it no longer is. But I love that you also talked about those transitions in our life, right? Like, I actually, until you said that, hadn't really thought of it necessarily. And that is, I mean, that's a transition that we have to grieve what was to transition. And what you said about being an entrepreneur is, I have those moments too. I look back and I'm like, man, I had so and so friends and like we used to all hang out, and then I'm like, but that's not who I am anymore, and that's not who I want to be anymore, and I'm okay moving forward now. But that was really hard for me at those moments, and sometimes it is because I'm like, well, nobody calls me, and I'm just like, but that's some things that come up. But then I realize like all the things that are in front of me and what I'm working towards. So there is that key piece of, now it clicked into my brain as you were saying that, is that's an element of grief. It's an element of having to move through that transition. And that's amazing. So thank you for that. And I wanted to also go back to, because you kind of went over it really quickly, but I would love if you are willing to share, being that this is really, we talk about our warrior stories. And you mentioned that you had been diagnosed with bipolar, but before you almost ended your life. If you're willing to share a little bit more about that experience.
oh yeah, I love sharing this story, Kelly. So let's go back 7 years ago. So 7 years ago, 2016, I like to call it my highlight reel of Instagram. If Instagram had highlight reels back then, mine would have had easily over 1 million views. The TV career that I had, first of all, I lived out of the country. I lived in Cyprus. And then when I had to move, come back home, I was in college at the time. 2 weeks after graduation, I landed my dream job at NBC. And of course, we're all excited. Brand new city, brand new state, brand new people. Of course, I'm young. Oh, I get to see all the nice guys who are around. We'll see, right? Gotta be transparent, of course. Well, of course, I started my TV job October 10th, 2016. And it's funny because 7 years later, I signed my papers to be on E360 on the same day, but that's a whole nother day. We'll talk about that later. But I'm excited. This is what I worked for. This is what I dreamed of. When I get to the job, everything's going great. And then 4 weeks into the job, I just started noticing a change in my mental status. Like, I'm sitting at my desk trying to type on the computer, work on my scripts for the newscast for the 4:35 at 6 in the morning, because I worked overnights, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Sunday through Thursday. And I noticed I kept hearing the Charlie Brown teacher in my ear, like, womp, 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 womp. I'm like, why am I not comprehending anything that I'm doing? What's going on here? So then I start having just outbursts at work, on my coworkers. When I would go home after work, I just sleep the entire time. I mean, I was literally depressed. Now, mind you, let's put things into perspective. I'm 1,000 miles away from my nuclear support system, number one. Number two, I'm in a brand new state, brand new city. So I don't know anybody. I haven't made any friends yet outside of the people who I know in the newsroom. And then after that, you figure too, I'm still adjusting to this new role. And then let's be honest, right? When you take on a new role, right? You don't take on a new role because you know it. You take on a new role because you're trying to better yourself. Well, this new role, there's a part of me that's asking myself, did I make the right decision to do this? Right? So there's grief right there that we don't talk about. So in the mix of that, 4 weeks into this job, all this stuff is happening, all the chaos. Well, knock on wood, I had an amazing producer who worked in the newsroom who pulled me to the side. You know, there's always that one person who sees you for who you are. And they pulled me to the side and said, look, it's none of my business, but I think you should go see somebody. You're an amazing asset here, but I think you're having a hard time adjusting. Okay, fair enough. So gotta love our healthcare system. It took 3 weeks for me to get an appointment with a therapist, of course. 3 weeks. So of course I'm doing my best to make the most of it while I'm at work. So I go to this appointment, meet with this therapist, and she asked me a series of just weird questions. We'll come to find out. She asked me all the questions on the back of the box for Lamictal. That was literally what she asked me. Okay. So, okay, fine. So I answer all the questions, and she's like, oh, you have bipolar disorder. I'm like, huh? What is that? Now, mind you, when you think back to that time, Kelli, mental health wasn't talked about the way that it is now. And I'm like, okay, I have bipolar disorder. Is this the same as being bisexual? What is this? Make it make sense. And she's like, literally, I'm not even kidding. This is exactly what she said to me. Well, your brain's broken and it's not your fault. But we recommend that you take these medications to help you get balanced. Now, mind you, I'm on the verge of losing my apartment. I'm already on a PIP at work. So, of course, you cling on to their word like for dear life, like you're out stranded in the ocean. So that's what I did. They started me on a cocktail of medication. Okay, fine. Things started to go a little bit up on the roller coaster ride. But then maybe 2 months later, it went straight back down like Mr. Hyde's nasty fall. You know, a lot of those medications, they tend to make you gain weight. For me, I went the opposite. I went from a size maybe 16 in pants all the way to a 9 in 2 months, being on 3 different meds. And work just wasn't getting any better. I'm still getting scripts thrown in my face and just all this stuff. I'm still not doing anything right. So I remember just one day I woke up, and this was in February of 2017. I woke up and I said, you know what? I'm done. If this is all that my life is going to be of me going into this newsroom, I'm anxious every time I go in there. I'm wondering, when is the glass going to break again, because I can't seem to get the job right. So I go into work, didn't take my meds that day because I was already done. Mentally, I was prepared to make the pain stop somehow. I was mentally prepared. I had already cleaned out my desk the day before. So I go into work, go through my shift, and let's just say one of the producers at the time, let's just say somebody peed in their Cheerios that day, and they decided to let the whole newsroom know and take it out on me. So they took out everything on me in front of the entire newsroom. And I remember it felt like I was being bullied all over again. Because if you were bullied as a kid, you know what that feeling is like. It's almost like having all of your fears, like a serial killer, in front of you all at once. So initially, you're going to try to get out of there from when that happens to you, especially if you've never really worked through that through therapy or some other type of modality. And I remember, Kelli, I remember getting up from my desk and I went in the dressing room and I just cried. I cried a river. And there was this level of euphoria that happened for me. That experience was like the gasoline that I needed to say, you know what, I'm out of here. I don't care about anything else. Screw my apartment. And then because I was raised in a household very dominated by women, there was a level of shame that I couldn't go back home and tell them that I failed. I couldn't go back home and tell them, and don't mind my I know I have like automations ever since I updated my Mac, this stuff happened. So anyway, I had I felt like the shame was too much. I didn't want to have to explain that to my friends and my family that I failed. And I didn't want to hear a bunch of people say, "See, I told you you couldn't do it." So I remember leaving from the dressing room, there was this level of just, "Yep, this is what I'm going to do." So I leave from work, and where I lived at, I live right on the river, right on the Arkansas River, my apartment. Excuse me. So as I'm driving to my apartment, I stop at the Arkansas River and there's a bridge over there. And so I get out of my car, I have my cell phone in my pocket and everything. And right as I'm getting up on top of that bridge to jump off, and it's early in the morning, it's like 7 o'clock in the morning, my cell phone starts ringing. And it was my professor from college. She literally said to me, "Portia, you are not well. You need to take your black A," mind you, she's white, "take your black A to the hospital." So I got down and she called too. She called the hospital to make sure that I went. So I go, get checked in. Kelli, they didn't admit me. The hospital did not admit me, which, knock on wood, I'm thankful that they didn't. But I'm sitting there after they check me in, put an IV in my arm, all that junk. And as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, there's more to Portia's life than this. There's more to it. So the only thing that died that day in 2017 was me living the life that other people wanted. And that's when I made the decision to start prioritizing my mental health. Well, after the hospital discharged me the same day, believe it or not, I went home, went to sleep, and went to work that night. And I worked for 2 more weeks, maybe 3, and then I resigned. And I remember the day like it's clear as day. I remember the sky was this amazing color blue the day that I resigned, where I knew it was like the sign of hope that everything was going to be okay. And from there, that's when I started my healing journey. I've been, knock on wood, prescription medication free for the last 5 years after that. So
Wow.
it's been a journey, but yeah, it's not that I wanted to die. Let me say that. I didn't want to die. I wanted the pain to stop because I couldn't find a way out. And that's why I'm just grateful to this day that my professor literally, it wasn't my time to go. And not in that way. It wasn't my time. But I gotta admit, that experience of letting my TV career go, it did hurt me for a while. It did.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And um, it is incredible to have you be able to share it so clearly and knowing that, I mean, you have those moments, right? These moments in time that come up and it leads you into better moments. But also you really figured out you're done living the life that everybody else wanted you to. And you were so unhappy where you were at. Plus, you weren't really sure what was going on. So it's not like a full fault of the situation necessarily. Like there was a lot more happening, of course. And it is really interesting, at least like from my perspective, listening to that, because I know, at least in the mental health space, like bipolar is the one that is the hardest to diagnose because there's so many different elements of it, and it's generally a later in life diagnosis. But being able to have that experience and now being able to share that with others, I think that it's so important to understand what others are going through and really truly knowing that, like you just said, it wasn't that you wanted to die, which most who think about or have suicidal ideation, they don't necessarily want to die. They just want the pain to end,
Mm-hmm.
exactly like you just said. And I've heard that so often. And it wasn't your moment at that time. There was a reason that your phone vibrated, not saying that anybody that has taken their life, that it was their time to go by any means. That's not what I'm saying. But it also led you into this place. And I am shocked that they didn't admit you, but I'm glad that they didn't for your situation. Sometimes the pieces don't always connect. And I'm glad that in your situation it did. It all connected and you were like, there's more. There's more. I know there's more. And you've moved forward from that. So, wow, thank you for sharing that.
Kelly, can I add to a couple years ago, in 2021, I went back there. I went back to that bridge. I did. I went back there and I just stood there. Well, first I went to the newsroom. I stayed outside and I got closure. I got closure. I'd left my corporate job. So I quit my corporate job in 21 in July. And it's interesting because that was when my mom really had got sick. That was when her health was really declining fast. And I literally said a prayer to God. I said, God, give me a year. And that's exactly what I got. I got a year with my mom after I left my corporate job. But I went back to the bridge. I did. I went back there and I just stood there to just be present with the emotion, with the feeling. I touched it and everything to kind of relive that moment. And I was able to forgive myself for that. Like, it was hard, it was triggering, but I got through it because I knew there was a reason. And the same thing with the newsroom, because you can't go into newsrooms, like, they have security and stuff everywhere, but I stood outside at a distance and just kinda, like, observed and just let that energy out.
Wow. I mean, being able to go back to that place, I mean, wow. I'm totally in awe of you and being able to share that story. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to go to a quick sponsored break, but then we will be right back after that and just chat a little bit more. So we'll be right back.
Hey everybody, it's Portia Booker, and I'm your host of the Grief Grand Tour Show. Join me every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Vitality Network right here on E360 TV.
And like that, we are back. Oh, it changed where my video is coming from. All right, that was interesting. Let me change that back here. Hey, live TV. This is what happens, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. So if you happen to be just joining us now, thank you for watching. Portia and I are talking about her journey through grief and the loss of her parents. Also, she had a couple phone calls this morning that friends have had some family members transition today. And also, she just shared her story about when she was diagnosed with bipolar and when she thought about jumping off of a bridge at one moment, but there was a phone call that happened and saved her life. And now she really has learned that she was living a life that was defined by other people. And now she shares her experience on her show, which you just saw her commercial on E360. So I thought I was like, I got to get it on here while we are on together. So, I, again, Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I know when we started, you said you are an open book and you love to have these conversations, obviously, especially on your show. But I know it's not always easy to share with people about a mental health diagnosis, there, because some of those stigmas come up, and people, especially even with suicidal ideation, I have so many people, they're like, I can't tell anybody about this, like, don't tell so and so, or so I personally am of the mind, the more we can share, the more that we can get people talking and having these conversations. And that's, again, the whole point of the show, is having the hard conversation that nobody else wants to have. So I'm curious, and the questions that kind of pop into my head are, what is your thought process? Because I know that you also help people. You had mentioned that you are a death doula. You mentioned that to me earlier. So would you be able to share a little bit about like what you do specifically to help others?
I'm not like a I consider myself, that's the legal term for it, is a death doula, even though I've never gone to like the death doula class and did all that. But realistically, I kind of am. I hold space for people during their grief journey, because a death doula is mostly specifically for the person who's transitioning, right? And in a sense, I was both of my parents' death doula. I mean, I literally held my mom's hand when she took her last breath. Literally, I watched her heart stop. My father, his transition was very quick. He had a heart attack, boom, boom. But even still, I was the first person who got to the hospital after he transitioned. I mean, when I got there, it was within 20, 30 minutes of him transitioning, because when I touched him, he was still warm, you know? So the death doula really focuses on the person who's transitioning, right? And in a sense, some of them do provide support for their loved ones who are still here. Me, I tend to focus more on the people who are still here, right? To give them an ounce of hope, someone who's been there, someone who gets that. So I grant people permission to grieve, because we don't hold space for it. Everybody wants to throw their dirt or opinion of their grief onto you, when a lot of times they're just playing human microphone stand. I'm going to go a little real here. I am. They're playing human microphone stand because they're telling you all the stuff that other people have regurgitated to them. But what have they actually done during their own grief? And that was kind of that's what led to me writing my first book. My book is audio only. It's called Finding Grace Within Grief, Her Transition, My Transformation. And that was the epiphany that I got 2 weeks after my mom transitioned, when I picked up her ashes from the funeral home. Literally, as I'm driving home with her ashes in the back seat, this epiphany comes in the window that says to me, Portia, what if your mom's transition is for your transformation? And I see it. And I think that applies to all of us. When there's a door closing, another one opens. When someone transitions or something in our life transitions, it's for our transformation, it's for our benefit. But I think we get so fixated on the loss that we were unable to really see the gain. And grief paints duality. 100% there's duality with grief. You're allowed to grieve and be grateful. You're allowed to be sad and cultivate happy moments. You're allowed to be depressed and still smile. I think we tend to forget that because of how society has dictated how we should grieve. The 5 stages of grief don't exist. They don't. You're going to go through a wave of emotions. A lot of times, emotions are going to be fighting for center stage, like fighting for a microphone. You're going to be depressed. You're going to be ready to cry. You're going to be have sad moments or be ready to shout at the world. And that's all normal. That's okay. So, in a nutshell, Kelli, how I help people is really I grant them permission to grieve in my presence. Really, that's what it is. Because that's what 3 of these phone calls were today. All 3 of those people said, because you've been there. They felt safe enough to confide in me when they don't even have that level of confidence in their own family or other friends. And I want people to cultivate that. Like, I want people to grant themselves permission to grieve. Like the grief grantor way that we do this, right? The grief grantor focuses on gratitude, right? Finding gratitude in your grief journey. And what does that look like? Right? We all lose somebody, right? We all lose something. But find what you've gained through that, right? Like when I think about my mother, I'm grateful for the lessons that she taught me. I'm grateful for her being my mother. I'm grateful for the things that she instilled in me that helps me to this day, right? And are building, when we are in our grief journey, right, the more we speak about it, the more we're open, it helps us to build resilience and cultivate that and reinvent the way that we view grief, because society has this narrative that you're supposed to suppress your emotions, that you're supposed to be the tin man, but we're emotional beings, right? So why follow this narrative that doesn't apply? Grief teaches you a lot. When you look at the word grief, it's spelled Grief, right? IE in Latin stands for exempli gratiae, which means example. Grief gives us the opportunity to learn and teach what we know, what we learn on our own journey, you know, and then also being innovative in how we go about sharing our grief journey. I thought, Kelli, I was going to go back to school to become a mental health therapist and help more people. But every time, this is what I'm telling you, every time I put in my application to go back to school to do this, the line keeps getting cut. It's not meant for me to go back to school to become a mental health therapist. It's meant for me to be right where I am and hold conversations on grief to help more people to evolve their grief journey, right? Discover gratitude, evolve their grief. And then also forgiveness, because forgiveness is for you. It's not for the person, it's for you, because forgiveness truly sets your soul free. You're not forgetting what happened. You're acknowledging what happened, but you're not allowing the unforgiveness to weigh you down and continue to make you sink in life.
Yeah, they're I'm like, you're totally speaking my language. And I say so many of those things too, and I never really fully understood the whole forgiveness up until I started within the modality of neurolinguistic programming, and I started understanding that forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for you. And that's been a huge just concept for me in my journey of grief, and really truly understanding um what I can control and what I can't control, right? Like you had mentioned that too, is that there's no steps, there's no process. Everybody's journey through grief looks very different, and I'm not going to experience the same as you experience, and vice versa. And we can't, I always say, nobody wants anybody else's advice. Like, really, truly, we all want to be able to just have our own experience, and society may try to dictate what you're going through, but that's what I try to tell people too, is this is your journey. Like, you are the one going through this, and society's not going to dictate how long it takes or tell you that you should be over it. I say, I mean, I'm 7 years after my sister completed suicide, and I really, like, I have those days that I don't want to get out of bed. I have the days that I can talk about her till I'm blue in the face and it doesn't emotionally affect me. And that's what I love that you also said. We have the emotions, right? Like, we can be really happy, we can be really sad, we can it doesn't matter. Those emotions happen sometimes daily, sometimes hourly. Like, it totally just depends on the, and you and I were talking too, is music, right? Like,
Mhm.
there's certain things that trigger, and or just listening or talking about something. And I have learned over the past 7 years to just allow it and be okay wherever I'm at, and allow, if the emotions come up, it is what it is. And I'm not as scared about this journey. And I think that it was for me, I had a friend tell me that you'll never get over it. You'll never, like, get, like, you'll never get over it and you'll never like forget, right? But you learn how to grow forward. And that was a huge thing for me is that I will grow through forward and I'll go through it versus just like shoving it down like you said earlier.
Yeah, you carry it with you. You carry like what you mentioned. I mean, earlier today I went in the store and they were playing Christmas music and they were playing one of my favorite Christmas songs and I kindly had to leave out of the store so I could cry because it was too much. And sometimes I've gone into the store and they've played Christmas music or whatever music and I'm fine. But some moments it's too much and I'm like, "You know what? That's okay. I'll let the waterworks show be on rerun for a minute and that's okay. We'll still run with it." You know. The other thing I want to touch on really quick, Kelly, is comparison grief. I think we sometimes compare whose grief journey is heavier. Like I've had several people say to me, well, you don't know the experience because you haven't lost a kid, or you don't understand the experience, or they diminish their grief. Well, I lost a pet. It's not as grand as yours of losing your mother. What difference do it make? The common denominator is grief. Loss is loss. It doesn't matter whether it's a kid, a spouse, a pet, the job, the dream job. It doesn't matter. You know, I think that's another thing that society tends to put forth is depending on what if it's not something physical or if it doesn't have a certain status in life, then it's diminished. And it's like I want to remove that stigma that loss is loss. I'm going to say it again. Loss is loss. Grief is grief. Grief is grief. Love is love. Pain is pain.
Yeah. I love that. And thank you for, I mean, that reminder too is loss is loss, grief is grief, and pain is pain. And it really truly is. So, I think, I mean, this conversation is one that maybe you feel uncomfortable with hearing, or maybe you feel really comfortable in this space. And I think that's a great point is let's not compare what we're going through because I hear that a lot too is well, mine isn't as bad as. And stop saying that, people. The other thing that I hear all the time is they say sorry and they apologize when emotions come up. Don't apologize. It's okay. It's okay to feel those emotions and it's okay to go through whatever you're going through. And I think that's the conversation that we need to have more.
Yeah. You're allowed to be authentically you. You're allowed to feel, right? Don't suppress your emotions. Don't apologize. Like I always have to remind one of my coaches of this all the time. She's like, "Oh, I'm sorry for crying." I said, "No. Why are you apologizing?" I said, "I'm holding space for you. If other people are telling you that you can't cry around them, then you need to fire them as your friends. Fire them. It's no, I'll hand out free pink slips for you."
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Um and I know so we're kind of coming towards the end, but is there anything that you want to share that maybe we didn't get to?
You know, I love that question, Kelly. The one thing I will say is if you want to follow my journey, of course, I'm on Instagram at Portia the Grief Grand Tour. The other thing is I want to really touch on suicide when you're grieving because I know that during my mom's transition, I thought about it so many times. Like I found myself leaving my house at like 11, 12 o'clock at night and just going downtown because you figure you've got what 911 if you've got an emergency. You've got 988 for if you've got a suicide ideation or crisis or something like that. But for me, I knew it was grief. And I'm like, where do grievers go? Where can grievers go? And so for me, I've been, I guess you can say, in this boat of creating that a space for grievers to go because it's not all the time that I can't always talk to somebody. I don't always want to talk. Sometimes I just want somebody in my company to just be there. You don't have to say a word. Just be in my company. Just give me a place to go, because sometimes I can't sleep at night. Like even tonight, as I think about my two friends who have experienced transitions, right? That's weighing heavy on my heart, but having these conversations helps me to be lighter. So I encourage people to be bold, right? Own your grief journey. It's unique to you. Don't feel like you're strange. Know that whatever it is that's transitioning in your life is truly for your transformation, and don't compare your grief journey because it's unique to you. Don't follow the societal narrative that you have to be resentful, guilty, isolate yourself, emotional and unforgiving. Create your own. Create your own narrative, hold space, and pay it forward, right? Because grief is about learning. Learn how to redirect that love energy that you were dishing into a person, a job, a relationship. Learn how to redirect that back to you to truly transform into the best version of yourself.
Love that. um, and if people do want to follow your journey, where is the best place for them to connect with you?
Literally, you can Google my name. You can Google Portia Booker and you'll find me. You can also follow me on Instagram at Portia the Grief Grantor. You can also on Facebook, Portia Booker, or on LinkedIn, Portia Booker, or like I said, just Google me and you'll find me somewhere. I'm not hard to find. I'm around like a donut somewhere.
Yes, Portia Booker, and the link, at least Instagram, is below here. Facebook, and I think we also have LinkedIn in the comments of here. So this conversation has been simply amazing, and I am so blessed that you were able to come and share and really, again, have this conversation that not everybody wants to have, but it's really important to have. So thank you so much. And I know I'm going to be a guest on your show soon enough also, and it's just so fun that we can exchange, and I knew that we would have an amazing conversation. So thank you so much again.
Yeah, and Kelly, let me know how I can support you. Let me know whatever I can do to help, and because I definitely want to keep the word alive, right? Help more people, give hope somehow, and it's sparked through conversations. Let's talk about it. No more being about it. Let's do about it.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you again so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you, my friend. Peace and hair grease.
All right, y'all. Oh my gosh, that was another amazing episode of Make Mental Health Matter. I'm so glad Portia was able to come on, and I don't know what's going on with my cameras switching in and out, but hey, that's what happens during live TV. I'll have to figure out later what was going on. But whatever you do, make sure you come back. I go live again next Monday at 11 a.m. and Wednesdays at 7 p.m. That may be shifting a little bit. I did say that on the last episode, is I might be shifting the times and days around slightly. We'll see. I'm not sure exactly, but doing 2 shows per week is a lot. And I also want to make sure that I give you quality guests and information, as this show is all about, is connecting you to resources and having the conversations, the hard conversations that potentially people don't want to have, but they're really important conversations to have. So we'll see if we stay on the same nights or change it around. I don't know, but I will let you know before anything changes, I promise. And no matter what you do, come back on Monday because I do have an amazing guest. And I just want to shout out super, super quick. Thank you to everyone that supported BCC Evolution for Giving Tuesday up to Colorado Gives Day. You are all simply amazing. I appreciate you. And also keep in mind, BCC Evolution is a 501c3 mental health and suicide awareness nonprofit. So your donations are always valuable and go right directly back into our programs, which includes this show, which is part of our conversation program. So if you have some of those end of year donations, or you know a company or somebody that wants to save on their taxes next year, send them my way, or send them to bccevolution.org. And over here, they can do those end of year donations. Thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate you, and I will see you back next week.